Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I want to do a review of a duology called The Age of Tyranny. The first book is The Traitor God and the second book is God of Broken Things. Both of these books are by Cameron Johnston and I received copies for review from the publisher Angry Robot. And if you're not familiar with this series, I am going to talk about it in a spoiler-free way. So even if you haven't read the first book, you won't be spoiled for the second or vice versa. So this is safe for everyone to check out. But this is a series that very much caught my attention and I did want to give it a closer look myself. This first book follows a man named Edrin, who is a magic user that has been exiled from his hometown in order to protect his friend and his friend's family. However, he finds out that his friend has died and is now returning back home to investigate what has happened to him. I found this book to be a really intriguing story. It is part mystery and part an action adventure story that is quite fast-paced. I've heard other reviewers describe this as an RPG video game, and I think that that comparison really works because it is very fast-paced and has that similar feel. If I was going to compare it to a particular video game, I would actually compare it to the Witcher games, just because so much of at least the first book is the main character going around and investigating what is happening in the world, because of course he's trying to investigate his friend's death, but that leads to bigger stories and you find out that something more serious is going on from there. Of course, I'll leave the synopsis there as not to spoil anything, but you have this character that is in a fantasy world trying to look for clues and unraveling a mystery. While I want to make that comparison to The Witcher, I need to preface it by saying that Edrin is definitely not Geralt, but he still is a really compelling character and probably my favorite aspect of this book. He is just foul-mouthed and opinionated. It's told in first person, so you really get to get into his head. This book is also written in a modern language, which I personally prefer. I know some fantasy books almost have an old-timey medieval language to them, and this book is very modern. The character is constantly dropping F-bombs, he's saying balls and all sorts of things like that, so it depends on the reader how you feel about that. For me, I found this book very accessible. I do think it's easy to get into. Anyone who's familiar with a classic fantasy narrative will understand this story and it's very easy to follow. I found this book to be engaging. I will say that it is dark. I definitely wouldn't call it grimdark. I don't think it goes far enough for that, but the author does envision a dark world that is full of poverty and prostitution and crime, and it's just a little bit ugly. And I do appreciate that. I'm not someone who really enjoys the narrative of like a knight in shining armor, so I more like the fact that Edrin is a very unlikable character. I did like the magic system, even though it is quite soft. There's some really cool things that the character is able to do, from mind reading to healing. And while he's very overpowered, at least in the first book, I appreciated that there was talk of limitations to using magic. So the author was trying to make it so that the character wasn't overusing magic, but instead decided when to use it and when to hold off. So I like that balance because you want to see the character do really cool things, but you also want there to be limits so that the character doesn't seem too powerful. And I think he did a good balance there. If I had one downside to this series, I would say that it didn't exactly bring anything new to the fantasy genre. If you've read fantasy books in the past, you've read something similar to this. I don't think that it really brought an original idea, and it just felt like a story I'd read before, which did lessen my enjoyment of it. I never got fully immersed in the plot, and that did fall over into the second book. The second book I won't say too much about, but I'll say it takes off from where the first book ends, and you definitely get some bigger stakes because of that ending. So it's a good second book. I like the fact that this is a complete duology, so instead of a long-running fantasy series, you can read both books and be done. And I definitely prefer that because I'm actually not a big series reader. So I like that we got a complete story, and I do recommend this book to people who just really enjoy fantasy, can't get enough of the genre. But if you're looking for something a little bit different, this might be a bit unsatisfying for you because I just found it a little bit tired. Even though it had so many elements I enjoyed, when you put them all together, it just was an average fantasy book for me. So that was my only kind of downside to it, but I'm definitely glad I checked it out. I would definitely read more from this author and would be interested to know if you've also read this series, what you think of it. As well, if you haven't read it, I'd love to know if you're thinking about picking it up after this review. As always, thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.